So, hello, good morning, welcome. I'm here today to talk about the wonderful and terrifying act of releasing software. Um, a bit about me. So before I get to the things I've released, I'm a student at the University of Chicago in the U.S. I live where there's lots and lots of snow, and I am celebrating summer by coming to Minsk, and wonderfully it's sunny outside, which was a surprise. So, things I've released. I've been doing lots of open source software for the past several years, and the thing that got me into all of that was CocoaPods. So for a long time, I was basically the lead developer of CocoaPods until I sort of left the project a couple months ago. I currently work on Bundler, which is another package manager, but for Ruby instead of the iOS world. I used to work at Realm, shipping the Realm Cocoa framework, both the Objective-C and Swift versions. And before that, way before that, I worked on the Tumblr iOS app. Okay, so that's great. I've shipped lots of software, hooray. Why am I talking about it? Well, it turns out, as software engineers, releasing software is something that all of us have to do at some time or another. Be it every day, every week, every month, every year, once per job. We all end up releasing and shipping software. It's also in this weird area of, well, you need to have some technical expertise to ship software. You have to know how to build and test, compile, how to package for, how to code sign. But there's also a lot of non-technical skills involved. How to communicate with people, both your users and people that you work with. How to market effectively, how to make good decisions about when to release software and how to release it and what to release. And finally, we don't actually talk about the act of releasing software very often. I see lots and lots of talks and blog posts and tweet storms about which language we use. Do we use Objective-C or Swift? Which testing frameworks we use? Which package managers we use? But I don't see a lot of discussion about, specifically, how do we release our software? And I think that's a shame, because it's something that I've gotten wrong so many times. I actually can't count the number of times I have, gone in to release something, typed up all the commands in my terminal, pressed enter the last time, upload something to the App Store, press, the release to the public button, walk away only to get called back, from the coffee shop 10 minutes later with, Sam, you broke it. So obviously, I don't like breaking things, and in the act of breaking things, we've learned quite a lot. So why do we release our software? This may sound like a really silly question. We release our software because that's our job. But I think it's important to understand why we do this part of our job if we're to be able to make good decisions about when and how, and if we want to be able to judge whether we're doing a good job or not. So a big reason that we ship things, especially if you're talking about, open source tools or something, is a release is a really convenient name for the software at one point in time. When someone tells you that, okay, I am using iOS, 10.3.2, you know exactly what that means. There's no question of, well, does that version, include, are you using something with this feature? Are you using something, that was compiled for a different whatever? No. A release means you know exactly what it is you're talking about. Releases are a really convenient time to market something. It's not very exciting if you can just say, hey, something new. But if you can say all new, version 2.0, upgrade now, well, you can get people's attention with that. You can get people to write stories about that, leave new reviews, write lots of snarky tweets. It's also a really concrete endpoint for the work you're currently working on. So if you've been working on a feature for a while, well, the release that ships that feature means it's done. You've done your job. You can take a deep breath, pat yourself on the back, and go take a vacation. And finally, it's a chance to get the work that you've been working on onto your user's device. It would really be terrible to spend all this time writing code and never have anyone use it. Okay, so it's a convenient name for the software at a point in time. Who here has heard of SEMver or semantic versioning? I'm seeing some hands. So semantic versioning is sort of a formal specification for what a version number means. So that way, if I can see that you've released an update and it's called 3.0.0, I know there are big changes in this update. It's also a good way to communicate with your users. You get a bug report. My app is broken. Every time I click this button, it crashes. Well, you can ask, what version are you using? Okay, well, we fixed this. Go and update. Hooray. Or someone asks for a feature. Hey, it would be really awesome if, if I could add a filter to my photo on a photo sharing app. Hey, we added that. Go update. It's also, more than just pointing people to be helpful, it's a great time to say, update right now. We've got something really exciting for you. We've got something that maybe is so exciting, you're going to be willing to pay me more money to be able to get these features. It's also just a good way to remind people that, hey, this app exists. Maybe buy it if you like it. Leave a rating on the App Store. Just don't forget that I exist and I built this thing for you. I also have gotten the feeling all too many times of having put in, weeks and weeks of work into something and just getting frustrated that nobody has seen it, that it's not finished. I refactored something and, I want to be done with that refactor. I fixed a crash and I want my user's app to stop crashing. I did a thing that the boss asked me to do and I want to, get him off my back for finishing it. Maybe, you know what? I've put a lot of work in to this update. I just want to take a break. It's also a chance to get more work onto our user's device. Maybe you've added subscription features that users can start using. Fixed bugs that were annoying people. Or maybe you work on an app that has a server-side component. And by releasing the iOS app, you're finally able to stay in sync with what's happened on other platforms. Maybe a feature that's existed in the Android app you get to catch up with. Maybe you get to switch to a new API endpoint. So your server team will be happier. But all of these are business reasons for doing software releases. And I think it's important to keep them in mind as we try and schedule when we do releases, as we try and decide what tools and what processes we're going to use. So ultimately, we can choose correctly and be able to evaluate how well we've done. Okay, so getting on to it. What are the sort of different strategies or schedules that we see people releasing their apps on? Well, I'm just going to go through some of the really popular ones. My favorite one, which is never release software. You can release things basically when someone tells you to. When you've done a certain amount of work. Maybe it's, you say, I'll do a new release when I've fixed 10 bugs or added 2 new features, or I've changed X lines of code. You can release once a year, once a month, once every 2 weeks, and you can release continuously. So as my dear friend Boris, who is the snarkiest person I know, has said, the best release date is always, coming next month. It's not here yet, but it'll come eventually. So in all seriousness, there are upsides to never releasing software. Software that you don't release, you never have to support. You're never going to have any users. You're never going to, be published on the App Store. You can't get any bad reviews that way. It can't crash if it's not running on any devices. There's also no extra work required. Releasing software takes, planning and time. If you never release, you don't have to do that work. But on the downside, you can't announce what you've released. You can't really charge money for something that doesn't exist. And you can't have that satisfaction of saying, I finished the app. It is done. There's also sort of the when my boss feels like it, when I'm told to do a release totally out of my control approach, in which there's absolutely no predictability. You don't know when a release is going to come. You know that eventually you'll get an email saying, why haven't you shipped this yet? Go do it, and you'll do it. But other than that, you have no idea. On the upside, there's no pressure to do a release if you don't want to. If you think your time will be better spent by writing more code or maybe working on a different product, that's fine. In general, this is short of the who knows approach. In case you haven't noticed, this is sort of moving in the order of less formal, most amateur to most professional, and most frequent, and that is not really a coincidence. So this next one is when a certain threshold of completed work has been reached. So on the bright side, you get the right amount of change in every release. You have enough to market, enough new features to talk about, enough changes that you can maybe be proud of it, and feel good that you've done work and made things better. And every release will be worth the effort that you have to put in to releasing it. And it also won't contain too many changes. You won't break too many things at once. You won't overwhelm too many users, make them feel too uncomfortable with the changes in the app. Users can also trust that, okay, for them, upgrading, taking the risk, trying something new is going to be worthwhile. They're not going to have to spend, 10 minutes downloading a huge 100 megabyte update, only to be disappointed that it contains bug fixes and improvements. On the flip side, on a small or very mature product, you can go a long time in between releases. It can take months to get enough bug reports to fix enough bugs to feel that making a release is worthwhile. On a small app, well, maybe you'll never add enough features to feel that a second release is worth it. And so your software can sort of stagnate. Now, this is the very popular one. Has anyone ever seen the App Store release notes? We bring you an update to the App Store every 2 weeks to improve your experience using our app. Please leave a review. Please send feedback to this email. Anyone seen that? Okay, so someone has Facebook installed. This has been a huge trend for the largest iOS apps over the past couple of years. This is a funny Twitter exchange I found searching through when trying to find something Boris had said. But instead I found this. So imagine that, this was the release notes for your app. Thanks for using clothes. To make clothing better, clothes are released every 2 weeks. Every update includes improvements and bug fixes. As new clothes become available, we'll let you know. This is basically how a lot of apps' release notes read nowadays. More seriously, yes, this is a valid thing to do, as much as I like to make fun of it. You get very predictable timelines. You know that there is a release happening every 2 weeks. As an engineer, you know that, okay, if I can't land this new feature for this release, that's okay. There's another one coming up really soon. Alternatively, if you've gotten a lot of bug fixes done, you know that, okay, this is going to ship out soon. I don't have to worry about how long users are going to spend with a crashy app. You get lots of practice doing releases. If you release every 2 weeks, you're making 25, 26 releases a year. That's a lot of chances to work out all the bugs in your release process. To know, the things that, to get really good at, taking new screenshots and writing release notes. On the downside, the amount of changes you have in each release can vary. You can have a release where you redesigned everything. You can also have a release where maybe there are just a couple of bug fixes. This tends to work really well for very large teams and not so well for teams of 1 or 2 engineers. And finally, you need some way to handle work that's in progress but isn't quite done yet. Feature flags, A/B testing frameworks, things like that. And finally, we get to the biggest buzzword of them all, continuous delivery. So this is the new, or I guess not so new at this point, really popular thing for web developers. What continuous delivery is, it's every change I make, every time some code gets merged into the master branch of the Git repo, we deploy it. We say, okay, that's a new release. So a huge benefit of that is the product that the user is seeing is exactly the same as what you're working on. If you get a bug report, you can immediately fix it, reproduce it using exactly the same setup that your user has, and then ship it out. A single release also becomes a non-event. If you're releasing multiple times a day, well, that practically guarantees that you have lots of infrastructure in place for doing releases. And you can also revert problematic changes before new work gets a chance to build on them. I know there are tons of times where I've thought I've fixed a bug. I commit that, and then maybe while doing that, I refactored some things, and I used all the new things that I've introduced in the next couple of commits, only to find out later that it didn't work. And then I have to go undo not only this one change, but everything that came after it. So some downsides to continuous delivery. Things like, how do you report a bug if you don't have a version number? Do you just say, well, at 11:23 a.m. on July 14th, this went wrong. Have fun reproducing that. Also, all of your changes have to be completely self-contained. It's really hard to coordinate in-progress work between maybe multiple people or multiple teams if every commit has to be ready to deploy. So how do we choose? Well, the first thing is we always have to respect our users. Depending on what your app is, some of these choices may not be appropriate. If you're building, software that deals with people's money, it's not okay to say, I'm never going to release updates. You're going to need security fixes. Likewise, if you're building a very tiny game, you maybe don't need to push out updates every day. Just like let people play, they'll enjoy it, everything will be good. There's also the question of how much developer time do you want to spend dealing with releases? How much time do you want to spend automating releases? Finally, how fast is the rest of your company moving? If all your company does is build an iOS app, great. pick whatever you think will work best. But if you work in a larger company that has a web team and an Android team and, a general product team and marketing people and salespeople, you need to move at the pace that they're moving at. If your server is being, if your server team is deploying 10 times a day, shipping an app every 3 months might not fit well with that schedule. Another thing is there's a lot of stuff that we have to do when we go to release that isn't code. I know, shocking. I'm talking about not code things at a developer conference. It's like release metadata. I think we've all seen this when going to submit an app to an app store. Things like release notes. Well, these take time to write. You maybe want to update your app description if you've added new features that you think users will care about when choosing an app. Updating translations if you've added new strings to the app. Taking screenshots every time a design changes. And now Apple's trying to push us to make marketing videos. And you've also got to pick a version number. I think there even is like a fancy German word for the anxiety caused when trying to pick a new version number. The good news is, even though there's so much work to do when releasing software, people have built lots of tools to deal with it. First up, well, to release something, you have to release it to somewhere. That may be like a package manager if you're building an open source project, the iOS App Store. You can use projects like Fastlane to coordinate all of these things. You can hook into your continuous integration service to maybe publish internal betas, make sure you're always ready to release, even handle pushing to the App Store, with things like, Jenkins. You can set up a button that does a release for you. You might even have a QA team that will help make sure that you're not regressing and that the app works. The good old-fashioned tools of like makefiles and bash scripts. And also, yourself, you can type out lots of commands on the command line and do everything manually. But to do things correctly, there are actually a lot of steps. The first one is determining what you're actually releasing. This could be as simple as checking the Git logs from your last version until now. It could be as complicated as deciding what feature flags you want to enable, what code you want to comment out, what things you want to rush before the next release. Picking a version number if you release version software. There's also sort of the new Facebook approach of, we don't need dots in our version number. There's version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, on and on. You can decide who's going to get the release. Some platforms, like I know Android has had forever a staged rollout feature where you can decide, okay, well, day 1, 5% of my users will automatically update. Day 2, maybe let's go to 15%. Day 3, 50. Day 4, everyone gets the app. You can decide if you're making a major update, is it going to be a separate app? Are new features, are you going to have to purchase them separately? What devices are you going to be compatible with? Are you dropping old operating system support? you can decide who you're going to tell about the release. If it's a major release, complete rewrite of the app, new design, new everything, does it get press and marketing? Are you going to write up a blog post? Are you going to reach out to reporters? Are you going to give a beta version to certain people so they can try and review it? And also in your own, marketing, what changes do you want people to focus on? Is there a particular feature you want to drive people to look at? Those features tend to be ones that will make money. You can also pick a date. When are you going to do a release? Are there things that you have to do before that date comes? Do you have to prepare marketing materials? Do you have to wait for a new web app to be deployed? And if you do have to wait for things to happen, well, what happens if they don't? What happens if the product review isn't ready? Or the new API has bugs and the web team isn't willing to release it yet? Are you going to push the release date back for that? Also need to decide what a successful release will look like. This could be as simple as, I don't get angry emails in the middle of the night saying I have to fix something and ask for an expedited review. This could be percentage of, does the crash rate go down? Does user engagement increase? Do more people start downloading the app once we add a feature? You have to tell people in your company that you're releasing an app. If you have a support team, they probably should know that things are changing. If you're deploying something that will hit new endpoints, well, you may want to tell someone on the back end that, hey, expect like 150 times as much traffic as you were getting in the next 30 minutes. You also need to remember to release the software after you do all this work. I know I've gone countless times, I've finished everything, and everything was ready to go. I post in Slack, hey, I'm releasing this version, and then I go to bed. And that's a waste of a lot of work. Bad releases also happen. And just like everything else in life, how we handle bad surprises is probably more important than how we make good things. How do you respond when users report lots of crashes? Or you've added a feature that upsets people. Maybe you've changed your pricing model and people are very upset about that. You have to be ready to respond. On the more technical side, I actually have a bit of a short story. I was once releasing a new CocoaPods version. I was out at a bar with my friends, had my laptop. Was like, oh, well, I did all the work earlier. Let me just run the release command. I did that while tethered to my phone. Took forever to upload. I said, okay, great. I'm done. I'll have another beer. Put my laptop away. Wasn't paying attention to my phone. Walking home like an hour and a half later, I've got 10 or so tweets of people being like, hey, you broke CocoaPods. It doesn't work anymore. In retrospect, releasing while at a bar right before having a drink probably wasn't the best decision. So I had to go home and try and figure out what I'd done wrong. It turns out I just needed to release a version of one of our other gems. But that was a real wake-up call for me that I had to be more careful when making releases. So when things do go wrong, you've got to communicate that something went wrong. Send out a tweet saying, hey, we know there's a problem. we're working on it. After the fact, maybe explain what happened and why it happened. You'd be surprised how many people are interested in hearing why things went wrong. And you've got to come up with a plan to avoid making the same mistake again. You know, it's the old fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. It's okay to make mistakes, just make different ones. And finally, you have to actually implement that plan and hopefully automate it. Basically, just don't make the same mistake twice. There's only so many times you can get away with a genuine "I'm sorry" before people will say, okay, great, you're sorry, but I depend upon your app, and you broke it. There's also only so many times Apple will let you do an expedited release. So, okay, covered a lot. But modern releases, you know, the software world that we're in today is really demanding. It requires that we use tooling to automate things that are error prone. Things like we make sure we upload screenshots for every device form factor. Obviously running automated testing. You know, happening on a predictable schedule, it turns out, is really important. It means you always release your work. Users know when you're going to be releasing things. The more frequently you release, the smaller changes you're releasing, the less disruption to users, the less that they're going to have to make major changes to their workflow. And finally, releases today, they demand perfection. There's so many people building apps nowadays. And as engineers, one of the things that we can do to set ourselves apart from everyone else is making the final piece of the software engineering puzzle as smooth as possible. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your code is or how well implemented your features are if you aren't able to deliver them to your users successfully. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, first, thanks for the report. Pretty interesting. And you've been talking about different release strategies. So what strategy do you personally prefer? And on the one hand, and you have to use in your projects on the other hand? Thanks.
So most of the things I've worked on have been of the more when things are ready to release, we'll know it and we'll do a release then type. But I think going forward, one of my goals is to move projects where I can to scheduled releases, especially open source projects that, you know, it takes time to release, and sometimes it feels like doing a release is getting in the way of me doing my job. I think just having a schedule, knowing that okay, every 2 months we'll do a release, no matter what's done. You know, we'll take a couple of hours and make sure that it's in the hands of our users, rather than letting all this hard work sit on a GitHub repo that no one's using.
No more questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,